Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this first 1001 Days Movement Lunchtime webinar. We're so pleased to have you with us today and giving up your lunchtime to join us. As you know, we use these webinars to bring our movement together, to share our expertise and to learn together as a community. In the past, we featured different members sharing their excellent work in supporting babies and their families in all sorts of various different ways. Today's webinar is slightly different. We're going to cast our minds back to the Manifesto for Babies that we published before the election last year. It outlined our collective asks for whatever government was formed after that election. This was based off a survey that many of you will have contributed to, so thank you so much for that and for sharing your expertise. And we took all that information and developed it with our steering group, ultimately into the final version, which was the Manifesto for Babies. It set out a clear set of actionable recommendations that any incoming government could take forward. And then with your help through the election period, we ran the Speak Up for Babies campaign, which asked candidates from all political persuasions to advocate for babies. Well, we've had the election. Keir Starmer's been Prime Minister for a little over a year now, so we thought it would be a good time to take stock of what we've achieved, which of our Manifesto for Babies recommendations have been taken up by the government, and which that we still need to do some work on. So we're going to look at our scorecard today with our excellent panel from First 1001 Days steering group members. We've got Tamora, who chairs the movement and is secretariat to the new all-party parliamentary group on babies. We've got Matt Hann, representing Home Start UK, Emma Gardner from Action for Children, and one of our individual members on the steering group, Professor Eunice Lumsden. Together, we will look at where progress has been made and what more there may be to do. And as always, we want you to be part of this discussion. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask your questions and share any reflections that you might have. So with that, let's begin as we go through the various recommendations. The first recommendation that we had, as I tried to navigate, was to call for an ambitious cross-government strategy to support babies' healthy development. If we look at pass over to the panel, Tamora, do you want to start taking that one?
Yes, lovely. Thanks so much, Ben. So yeah, this was the first of our 5 recommendations, and we really wanted to see government departments working together, and also the Prime Minister taking ownership of a strategy to improve babies' health and well-being. And we talked here about a cabinet committee which could report to the Prime Minister to join up government. And we also talked in the Manifesto for Babies about the importance of aligning different government departments to work towards common outcomes. So back in December, we got our first sign that this was something that was really going to come forward, and we were very excited to see in a plan for change published by Downing Street that there was cross-government working. You've heard us perhaps before talk about the mission boards that bring together different government departments, and within those mission boards, the opportunity mission, as it's described, promised to give children the best start in life. So that was a really positive indication of this cross-government working. And within that, there was a commitment to strengthen and join up family services. And there was a new milestone, and that is described as a milestone. Some people might call it a target, and that was to improve child development age 5. So to make sure that 75% of children reach the good level of development age 5. So on this first element of the Manifesto for Babies, I would like to give it a great big tick. I'm feeling very enthusiastic about the scorecard. Recommendation 1, big tick. But I know things aren't that straightforward, and there's a lot more to unpick about how we measure outcomes. So with that in mind, I'd like to just invite Eunice to come in and just talk a little bit more about what that looks like, particularly in the critical first 1,001 days of life, because the milestone is set to be measured when children are 5. But what about babies? That's what I want to know. Eunice.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I share your delight in where we're at today, in terms of that we've still got, many things in the manifesto, the things we've been working on for years are really showing themselves. But I think it's really important that we also pause, take a deep breath and look at what evidence is out there, because measuring impact, measuring outcomes is really hard. There isn't no standard system. So actually we have got to think about what do the development goals, those at 5, look like in the first 1,001 days. And there's several things that have got to happen for that. Firstly, we've got to look at our systems, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, so that it is more joined up. I know I get very fed up with my own voice constantly saying early childhood education and care, early learning, we're not joined up with health and social care in the way we should be, and we're not round the table. So if the measurement is going to be coming from an education perspective, which they are because they're part of the early years foundation stage, then we need to be more joined up right at the start. And so we need to know, what does that look like? Not only if children are in with childminders, grandparents in early learning settings, but for parents, what does actually that look like? And that equates to a very simple slogan, which I heard last week from the Mayor of Liverpool, which is every new mother, every new parent should know to look in their child's eyes and talk to them. And that will simply change the start of their life. And so understanding the importance of constantly talking, reading to the child, doing all the activities that develop language. So blowing bubbles, the importance of blowing bubbles, the importance of breathing, the importance of constantly reading books that are using a whole variety of words. So for me, the first job is looking what's around there already. So like for baby's sake, I've been looking at baby impact, the Association of Infant Mental Health, various things, we've got all the health visitors measurements, ages and stages, etc. But how do we translate that for parents? I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Eunice. That's really helpful. And thank you, Tamora. The second recommendation that we had was a simple invest more in prevention. Now that came from the fact that we know it's cheaper to the state to spend money early on to help avoid and tackle problems before they get more advanced, and it costs more in the long run. But importantly, it's not just financial; it also leads to better outcomes. In our case, for babies and their families. So that's why we came to that recommendation. Matt, do you want to sort of look into that and give us a steer on how you think the government's doing?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think that the big headline call that we put into the manifesto was for extending funding for Start for Life and family hubs across the country. And when it comes to England, we can see that has been achieved. That's what we called for, and that has been confirmed, or at least has been confirmed that bringing the number of family hubs up to 1,000, and there's £500 million attached to that. And I think that's a big win. And I think we can see from this Better Start in Life strategy, and I'm sure everybody has had a chance to look through that now, that I think there is a kind of focus on that prevention, and joining those services up together is good. I think the focus on delivering the greater investment in disadvantaged communities is good. And so I think this is definitely something, again, that we can say, actually, we've called for this. It is being delivered. But I'm going to say that this probably isn't the start of the journey, but it is certainly not the end. And now I think we have to look at how will this be translated on the ground, how it's going to be translated in communities, how do we make sure that the services delivered through family hubs reach those families and children who most need the support, how they can, families who wouldn't normally access services in a place-based kind of solution like a family hub will access that support. What's the outreach support going to be like for families and for children who need that? That's not obvious at the moment, but I think that we'll have to look at that. And currently, I think we've seen across the country there is huge variation in what's being delivered through family hubs that are already having them. I think there'll need to be some more there'll be some ironing out of that. But I think that what is being what will be delivered is still in that design phase. And so I think there's still a chance for us as a movement and as organizations to influence that and to influence what that looks like. The other big element in that recommendation was for around the NHS long-term plan to include preventive mental health services for babies. And you'll know that the 10-year plan was published, I think it was only a few days before the Better Staffing Life strategy. It was a hectic week. By the end of that week, I had forgotten what had been announced and when. So it certainly was a hectic few days. But I think, Tamora, you can to look at that long-term plan and the impact that you think that's having on this area.
Oh yeah, great. Happily, that's it, isn't it? We're back to cross-departmental working. So we've got the Department for Education still leading family hubs, rolling them out nationally. We've got the commitment from the Department for Health and Social Care to expand Start for Life in line with it. But Department for Education has said how much money is attached. Department for Health haven't yet said what the funding will be for Start for Life. So there are two departments, they're working together, which is brilliant, but the announcements don't always sync. Which means there's still some outstanding questions to be asked there. Something else about Start for Life is the news that Start for Life is going to go from 0 to 2 up to 0 to 5. So it'll be expanded in its geography and expanding the age range, which really means it's important, as you've just said, Matt, what's the guidance, what are the requirements then of this programme once that funding settlement is confirmed. Yeah, the 10-year plan for health, as it's called, the 10-year plan for health sets out what the Department of Health's focus is. And we were really looking to that to see a strong focus on supporting babies' development, health and well-being. The 10-year plan for health is less of a delivery plan in this area. It's much more of a transformational strategy. So, for example, it's got a really big emphasis on use of technology and digital and data. But it doesn't include any specific targets or measures for babies. It's a different beast, really, to the 10-year plan that went before. It talks about transformation of services, this strong emphasis on digital. So, we'll be keen to see what the digitization of the Red Book looks like. There'll be a real onus on services that are delivering for babies to really capture data consistently. There's really important questions there that we've discussed before around making sure that every professional can access the baby's record and that all services that have contact with babies are also recording stuff on the baby's record, not just the parent's record. So there are really important principles there for babies. But looking back at our manifesto, we probably hope for something a bit more tangible in terms of a target or a measure to reach more vulnerable babies, knowing that the latest government estimate is that at least 10% of babies are at risk of disorganized attachment. So it doesn't deliver there. What it does say is that the more detailed delivery plan or national service frameworks will be produced, and one of those is going to be on mental health. That's a priority, but it doesn't say within what kind of time frame. So I'm going to give that half a tick because on the positive side, the long-term plan absolutely, sorry, using the old title there, the 10-year plan absolutely talks about the critical importance of the first 1,001 days. It recognizes, acknowledges how important that is, but it says you're going to have to wait and see what's going to come forward in terms of a concrete delivery plan for things like 0 to 5 services. So that one I'm giving a half tick, but I'm absolutely with you, Matt, on the national rollout of Start for Life and family hubs across England. That is a big tick, and that's been the focus of our campaigning really over the past year. Great. Ben, should we move on?
Yes, thank you, Tamora and Matt. Yeah, the third recommendation we had was tackle health inequalities so that all babies have a good start in life. It came through really clearly from the survey that we did of the membership that not all babies have the same opportunities, not all babies face the same barriers, and it's something I've been attuned to. There's a famous 83 bus route in Sheffield where the life expectancy of a baby born just a mile down the road drops by 10 years, and it maps across all other measures of healthy lifestyle, health outcomes, education outcomes, likelihood to be victim of crime, etc. So absolutely massively important. And obviously every city will have a story along those lines. That story will play across rural and urban divides. And so very important for us as a movement to make sure that if we want to give every baby the best start in life, we have to tackle the inequalities that disadvantage some versus others. So yeah, Eunice, do you want to talk through how the government's doing on that recommendation so far? I think you're muted, Eunice.
I knew that would be the case. Apologies, those listening, that I've told to turn myself off. It's usually the best way. I think really delighted that we're beginning to talk about these issues in a really positive way again. That I think there's two really important things about the health inequalities recommendation that we need to be proud of. And that's not just what this movement's been saying, but collectively with all the other movements that this organisation works with, is that we need something that's longer than a term of a government. So we have a 10-year strategy now which lasts, and we have language that is moving over from the previous government to this government, so the Start for Life, which is really important. And I think things to be a really tick and really pleased for, because actually the language we use is really important. So when we talk about poverty, Matt's going to talk about a minute about the task force, but I just want to remind us that we can't afford to wait. We have so many children in this country and babies being born into poverty, and we do need to focus on the training and understanding of what poverty means, because poverty means different things to different people. Research that I've been involved with colleagues here and in America really have highlighted the different ways that practitioners view poverty, how they talk about people in poverty, especially when they themselves are on incomes which are very low, and therefore they hit the threshold of poverty. And so we have a lot of othering going on in this area. And I think from the first level as professionals, we need to really understand and train what we mean by poverty, what that impact of poverty is, and what the impact of living in impoverished areas where you have poor access to resources, poor access to the best early education experiences means for a family, what it means when we're talking about our life outcomes and our health inequalities. If you're living in poverty, you live in the areas which are not going to promote your health. You're often living close to motorways or under an air path. You're living in high-rise blocks of flats. Actually, you're moving quite frequently because the cost of private accommodation at the moment means that families can't afford. They're moving more regularly. They can't take things with us. So I think we actually need a reality check, not only to understand the research and the impact figures, but what does this mean actually on ground? What does this mean for families? And that's really important because families do not want to be stigmatised. And the language we use is often very stigmatising for people. So we need to make sure that the services we offer aren't going to say you're coming here because you're a family that's disadvantaged. I'm using my fingers there, vulnerable. What on earth do we mean by that? The families very clearly say, and they said that for the original serfdom by the health inequalities that led to the Best Start for Life policy previously, that they want services, they want to be told and supported how to be a parent, regardless of social class, income. They want services that are not stigmatizing and are universal. So we talk about constantly these hard to reach families, but if you actually talk to, in quotes, the hard to reach families, these are families that don't live on a bus route, can't get to the location where their family hub is. They're not the hard to reach. Where we locate our services are not in the right places. And families clearly say that they want to be able to meet with other parents, to make networks and friendships that will support them through their childhood, their children's childhoods, and then draw on professionals if they want to. They don't want to be labelled and have services just because of how we use language to define them. And I think those things are really important. And that starts with us looking at what we think about poverty, how we view poverty, because there's some still really difficult held views out there, and actually with practitioners, that we need to challenge and to revisit if we're going to make this work. Matt, shall I hand over to you?
Yeah, thanks, Eunice. I mean, I think that after the first two recommendations got, I think, ticks or partial ticks, I think recommendation 3 is still an area where we're waiting and seeing. I think that we obviously called for the government to commit to strap to a child poverty strategy and to scrap the 2-child limit. We will have to wait and see, I think, until the Child Poverty Task Force reports, which is scheduled to be now, I think, later this year, or as it says in the early year strategy, late this year. What that looks like, I don't think anybody quite knows, because it was meant to be early this year, and then it was meant to be spring, and then I think I'd heard warm spring was the best euphemism that I heard for early summer. But now it's obviously pushed back again, and what that looks like, I don't think anyone quite knows. I mean, and for those of you who don't know and haven't been involved in that, it's looking at 4 different pillars, and in increasing household income, reducing household costs, increasing resilience, and in this better services for children and families. I think that one of the good things from recommendation 3 is asking for services to be co-produced with families to reach those most vulnerable babies. I think that is happening. I think that the Child Poverty Task Force has gone into a lot of detail and reach and talked to families and done a lot of outreach services. And I know that there have been organisations that have led on those and brought them in. Our Home Starts have been involved in that across the country, but I'm sure lots of people on this call have also been. I think that is good. We will see what that looks like. Then the government, I'm sure, would point to the fact that they've kind of increased the expansion of free school meals, which I think will benefit families. I think that they probably wouldn't admit, but point to, because it was so painful for them, but the changes that were hard won to the universal credit and PIP bill at the last minute, which mitigated a lot of the damage that would have done. It's still not kind of perfect, but I think that lots of us on this call did work in that area to try and mitigate that. I think that the other thing that we talk about services being co-produced with families, and also in making sure that they're reaching those families. I go back to the Better Start for Life strategy and saying that actually we do need to make sure that the services, when they are designed, as Eunice says, are doing it in a way that meets the family's needs. There is, I'm a little bit concerned at the moment that the guidance is if you can't reach a family hub, there will be a digital offer. Well, an improved digital offer for families, I think, will be great. But I think everybody knows that a digital offer isn't enough for when relationship and support is so important. And so whatever that looks like, I think that, simply saying that, I don't think will kind of I don't think will survive contact with reality. I think there'll have to be kind of better services delivered to people if this is going to be a success. But also, I think that the other area I think is important to look at in that strategy is the reference to communities and most marginalized and isolated families. It talks about improving services for dads in terms of outreach and for young parents. I think there has been some criticism of the strategy as it came out around not focusing on the impact that race and structural racism has in delivery of services. And I think that was, I've seen people that has been referenced. I think it is a potential failing of the strategy, and something that we need to make sure that we're addressing, that actually this is a strategy and solutions that reach all families. And I think that will be a big marker. So after 2 ticks, I think this is a wait and see, and much more to be done.
Thank you very much, Matt. Much appreciated. Yeah, so the next recommendation that we asked for, recommendation 4, was develop a workforce plan for children's social care and the early years. So at the time, we had an NHS workforce plan, of which some professionals work directly with families and babies, but there was a feeling from the movement that actually that meant that there wasn't such a coherent strategic view for the workforce that work with babies in other areas, and that came really strongly across in the survey that we did. And so when we worked it up with the steering group, wanted to have that as a key plank of our ask. Emma, we haven't heard from you yet. Do you want to say a few words about how the government's doing against this recommendation?
Yeah, love to. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, so we know, don't we, that a couple of years ago, the government, the Education Select Committee, carried out a bit of a review of early years, and workforce absolutely came through as a really key challenge. We know that the early years workforce has been in crisis for a really long time, with really high turnover rates of around 20% in group providers, which, when you think about the importance of those consistent high quality interactions with those consistent key people for young children, it's absolutely something that we need a really high level of focus on. Our early years workforce have been sharing how overwhelmed and underappreciated they've felt for a long time, and I think there's been lots of cries from lots of us around how a really clear workforce strategy is needed to be able to acknowledge and recognise and support the work that our early years workforce are doing. And so absolutely delighted to see that workforce takes a very central place in the Best Start for Life strategy. And it really talks about the importance of that high quality interaction and those consistent key people in children's lives, and the impact of that on positive outcomes. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of, there's a lot of discussion about how the needs of children have increased, the needs of families have increased, and the pressure that is putting on the system, and actually that we're not managing to meet the needs of everybody that we need to. There's a bit of a disconnect in that doesn't quite translate to how we're talking about the early years workforce, actually, and the pressure that they're under as the people that are delivering those services to families and kind of at the forefront of that and seeing people day in, day out. So I think, I know I'm not the only person saying this, in terms of Best Start in Life strategy, the devil really will be in the detail. There's a lot of unanswered questions around what this workforce strategy will look like. And we do know that there is going to be a real focus on workforce, but as you've already shared, we're not quite sure, Matt, are we, when some of this is going to come? But we do know that it is being looked at and it is being thought about. I think there is some work that needs to be done to address the elephant in the room. So I think whilst there's a lot of discussion about qualifications, how can we attract and retain high quality workforce, there also needs to be some discussion about pay benefits, and what does that look like? What should it look like for our early years workforce? So I think there's a lot of work to be done still, but I absolutely think this is headed in the right direction in this space. And I think we will start to see that come, because these people, as we know, are right at the forefront delivering those really important services. And it's really good for us to be able to see that it's starting to get that recognition as a key role to support children and families in those really crucial first 1001 days. And I think, Eunice, you wanted to talk a bit about the baby room experience, didn't you?
I did, thank you. Emily, it's lovely to see your enthusiasm. I was with a lot of early educators and education professionals last week, and there was a lot of sort of hope and joy. It's sort of going back 20 odd years to when there was a lot of money coming into the sector to do. And I think there's a couple of tick points, because I'm trying to very much work on the positives of all this happening, is that the workforce is being talked about in these strategies rather than as an appendix that's dealt with elsewhere. And for me, that's probably one of the first times that I'm seeing that more joined upness between health, social care and the early childhood education and care sector. And it's a sector that is incredibly challenging, because it's a very mixed economy. So actually, it's really hard to sort out because the sector is occupied by organisations like Action for Children, which is a charity, to those that make profit as well. So, and it is incredibly mixed to give parents choices. What is the real challenge that we've got to face yet is this juxtaposition between supporting parents to work and now offering from the term after a baby is 9 months that they can have up to 30 hours from September of supported, funded childcare, early years places. And the challenge of that in terms of meeting the needs of what is developmentally appropriate for a baby at 9 months, being separated from its primary attachment figure, and the nature of baby rooms. Now, there's Nuffield researchers doing research into baby rooms at the moment, and a quick literature review has shown that we've got very little research in England around baby rooms, and those in the sector speak very clearly about qualification levels, the knowledge, skills and attributes those working with our youngest citizens need. And we need to give a lot more attention to that. We need to empower parents to know what the right question is, because we've had a huge take up in that. But we know that can cause health problems later on, attachment issues. And so we need to think about a lot of training around infant mental health, and ensuring that those working with our youngest children know about that, know that they can't have frequently changing people going in, know the importance of the smallness of the place. So there's a lot of work still to be done there, because it is going to be a real challenge. The other challenge, which is where all our recommendations are joined up, is the amount of our infants and babies that could really benefit from that provision but can't access it, because you can only access funded 30 hours if you're in work, and lots of parents can't find work that fits within that structure, and therefore they can't access it. And then if they're in an area without a family hub, and then if they're in an area without a sufficient health visiting service providing that, the youngest children that the Best Start for Life is trying to meet the needs of are totally being missed. So I'm really glad that we've got a framework. We know there isn't the detail, but we have the practice wisdom, we have the research to know what we should be doing and what we should be arguing for. But one of the biggest things I think we do is that we need to support parents to understand what they're looking for and their choices. And we need to be driving up our childminding service as well, which has declined. So it's complex. It's because it's such a mixed economy of different qualifications, working in that area, we've got to make sure that we really are capturing what good looks like, what good infant mental health practice in our 1001 day period looks like, and make sure that that is being rolled out, and that we don't take our foot off the pedal. Now we've got this framework and we know that this is going to be looked at, and actually really addressing all of these very thorny issues, because that first 2 years lays down your later health outcomes. It lays down what comes next. And if we're then putting them in situations where they're not getting the best alternative care, then we really are letting down our young children. Yeah, thank you. Pass back to you, Ben.
Ben, is it right if I come in just one extra little point?
Yeah, sure, please do.
Okay, thank you. And thanks. I was just going to say, because it's true, recommendation 4 and 5, they cover a lot of territory. And you mentioned this a minute ago, Ben, but at the time we wrote the manifesto for babies, there was the NHS England led NHS workforce plan. So that was in place, and that set out predictions about how many health visitors and midwives and other professionals were needed. And so under our recommendation, we said how important it was to continue collaborating with professional bodies to try and accurately estimate and address workforce gaps across the whole range of health, social care and early years workforce. Now, Institute of Health Visiting can't be here today, but they're on our steering group, and they've done loads of work in this area. And I'm just very conscious that where we were a year ago with one NHS workforce plan, we're not there now because the government, as often happens with new governments, they've decided to review the NHS workforce plan. So the projections that it contained may change. And you can see in the 10-year plan, sorry, there's so many plans. As Matt said, we've been a bit overwhelmed with lots of different publications, but the 10-year plan for health, that talks quite a lot about workforce. And it does say that there won't be as many staff as were projected previously, that's not actually the way forward. That's not what the government thinks is the way forward, because and this is the theory within their plans, thanks to technology, health and care professionals will be empowered to be much more productive. So they'll be able to spend a lot more time with patients and delivering services, and a lot less time doing bureaucracy and having problems with, getting scans or accessing records or whatever. So the new approach to the NHS workforce is based on that sort of hypothesis. It's about improving productivity through the use of technology. In this area, in our area, there is a very important question about just how much will people be freed up if there is a much greater use of technology? What sort of productivity gains are realistic? And of course, that's really important, knowing that in midwifery, in health visiting, there are long-standing workforce gaps. There's long-standing shortage of professionals. And of course, a lot of the work that these key professions do is very relational. So whereas some services, there might be elements that could be done digitally, that won't be the case, of course, for every service, particularly very relational, personal services. And so I'm not meaning to, I certainly don't want to scare anybody by thinking that, there won't be an increase in health visiting. I'm not saying that at all. And in fact, the importance of health visiting is stressed in these documents. So the Best Start in Life strategy talks about improving maternity care, strengthening health visiting services. But the projections that we had previously, I think, are all being reviewed over the summer. So when it comes to, the ultimate plans for these workforces, again, that is under review. So on my scorecard, Where does everybody think we net out on that scorecard? Ben, I'm going to let you decide. Recommendation 4, is it another wait and see, or is it a positive tick, a small hint of a tick?
I'd go with a small tick. I think it's a direction of travel. The proof's in the pudding. We'll see what they come back with as whether we can extend that to a big tick in the future. Thanks, Tamora. So our next recommendation, recommendation 5, was for a rapid review of the tax and benefit systems for parents and carers of under 2s. And we had a range of different asks under that, very much recognizing that parenting can face its own set of challenges and sometimes just need a bit of help and support to help you do the best that you can, to take that little bit of stress and pressure off, so parents can be more attentive and focused on their children. I'm going to use the host's prerogative and give a bit of an answer here to start with before passing over to some of the other panelists. So one of the asks that we had under this heading was for the government to provide 6 weeks well-paid paternity and parental leave to help fathers and other partners play a more active role in the child's life in those early days. There's been a lot of activity in this area, and our members, the Fatherhood Institute, Dads Matters, and Future Men, have really been leading the charge. There was a dad's strike on the day of the spending review, and I attended a policy roundtable that the Fatherhood Institute hosted recently that brought together people from the sector and MPs, which talked about fatherhood as a strand of the forthcoming men's health strategy, but did also pick up on this point. And there's been a good level of activity in Parliament. Earlier on in the year, Sean Davies, who's an MP for Telford, held a debate on paternity leave in Westminster Hall, where there was a large level of support from backbench MPs. And I think what that signaled to us, and hopefully to the government, is that there is some hope here, that there is a range of people, both male and female MPs from different parties, who are interested in this, talking about the importance of giving dads more time at home with their babies and partners in their first days after birth. And that really sort of pushed things on, I think, in a nice direction. We then had the Women and Equality Select Committee hold an inquiry into parental leave. It came out with some really helpful recommendations. So they recommended that paternity leave be extended from 2 weeks to 6 weeks incrementally over the course of the Parliament, so up to 2029. They also recommended that paternity pay rise to 90% of average earnings, which would match the first 6 weeks of maternity pay. And they also recommended introducing a paternity allowance for self-employed parents, like the existing maternity allowance does for mothers. So whilst that's all great news, select committees unfortunately don't set the rules. What they often do is have some in-depth inquiries and make recommendations for government. So unfortunately, their recommendations don't change things in law yet, but it is influential. It does help and contribute to the debate. And most importantly, I think it keeps the momentum going. And it is working. You will see from the First 1001 Days newsletter that we sent out last week that the government have announced its formal review into parental leave. So this is encouraging. The timetable is awful, with the deadline for submissions being the 25th of August, right through the summer holidays. But I would encourage you, those of you listening to this call, to respond to that call for evidence to help keep the pressure on. And when I finish speaking, I'll post the link to that call to evidence in the chat. So I think it's really important that we can all put in as much evidence as we can and keep the momentum going that's built, starting with members of our movement, transition through MPs, through to the select committee, and hopefully we can turn that into some really positive action from government. So that's me using my host prerogative to jump in first. Emma, do you want to come in and say some other points?
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak really to the recommendation around acknowledging babies' development as being equally important as getting people back to work. And I think absolutely, you know, when a couple of years ago, when all these conversations first started, it very much felt like the focus of all of these things was getting parents back into the workplace. And it feels like, being optimistic again, that through this Best Start in Life strategy, we've had a real kind of shift in thinking. It feels like there's an acknowledgement there of how, if we get it really right for our youngest children, then actually the outcomes along the road are better, and how that early intervention and early identification and support is really key in supporting happier and healthier communities in the future. So I absolutely feel like that the way the strategy is written, the key focus within it actually has shifted away from thinking about the need to get parents back out to work and early years being about childcare, looking after babies while parents get back to work. This feels much more about how recognising that with high quality early education, with wraparound services, with good health services, actually can pave the way for happier, healthier outcomes for babies. And I think, we talk a lot, don't we, about the importance of family, actually, and remembering that parents are children's first and foremost educators. And I think that's something else that comes through really strongly within this strategy for me and for us in particular. Thinking about, we talked yesterday when we had a bit of a catch up, didn't we, about home learning as an idea, and we talked about, as a parent, that can feel like quite a big pressure. If you're busy with your day-to-day, with your work, with tasks, and you may not feel equipped, or you might not have capacity as a parent. And I think we talked very much about how this is about empowering parents to feel confident in how their interactions and attachments with their children are actually laying those really important foundations. And our job, the way we see it in early years, is actually to give parents that confidence in what they're doing. And as Eunice said right at the start, the power of looking in your child's eyes when you're talking to them, of play, of being down on the floor, having that beautiful connection. I think for me, that feels like it's a real thread of the Best Start in Life strategy, and something that I know as an organisation we're really excited to continue to support and build on that for parents, to make sure that we're not piling on tasks for them to do, but we're kind of helping them to recognise the power of what they already do and do well, in the most part. So I think that is it. Eunice, I think you were going to come in and talk a little bit there.
I just enjoyed that, Emma, because I just thought you brought out some of the joy of the language that's being used in the new document the new policy coming through. That's slightly odd, and I know some of my colleagues will be on my shoulder saying, Eunice, mention school readiness, but that's not what our agenda is, because it's this early 1001 days is about laying down the foundations for our whole life, giving us the skills, the knowledge, or the framework for moving forward. And we talked a lot yesterday, and I'm sure there'll be great debates out there as well about the home learning environment. I keep saying the home's the home. If you're lucky to have a home, your home might be one room in a hotel, because you haven't got anything else. And we have to be reality of what home looks like. And home learning is the term that came in a decade or so ago, trying to find out what's happening at home, and the research shows if you read more, etc. But it is, as you say, Emma, reinforcing and supporting parents to know what being a parent is like, what the skills are that you need, what the knowledge is that you need. And then fundamental to that is the importance of play. Play, there's obviously a lot of things are going on around play strategy again at the moment, but that starts right at the start of life, from pregnancy onwards. The playfulness that happens around all the things that play, for the baby showers and all of that, that's now the things that play gives us fun and enjoyment. Play is for me, is the most universal, best early intervention that you can ever have for children and parents, and for us as adults. And starting that and supporting parents, understanding the importance of play in terms of infant mental health, and for professionals, the importance of play for well-being across the life course is really key in some of this. So for me, again, it's always coming and looking for the opportunities that the manifesto called for, that we've now maybe got to help shape and really bring the agendas that are important to the fore. And so, Ben, you've already talked about the paid leave, but I'm passing that to you for more comment on that.
Yeah.
If you'd like to.
Thank you, Eunice and other panelists for their views on the recommendations and how government's progressing. Really appreciate your insights. So there's still a few minutes left. We've got a couple questions in the Q&A, but please use the Q&A function to send more in. We'll ask as many as we can. So I'll start with the first one. It's from an anonymous attendee saying, there's a lot of talk about school readiness at the moment. It seems to focus on more physical tasks, like using the toilet and being able to write. Should there be a broader view on school readiness linked more closely to a rounded approach to healthy development? And I'll just add in how you think that might link to the government goal of 75% of children reaching a good level of development. Do we have any takers who would like to jump in on that?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, you go ahead. You give your fans what they want.
Can we get rid of the language of school readiness? That's fundamentally, it's about children having all the things they need in those first, because early childhood actually goes up to the age of 8. In England, it's to 5 because that forms by the early years foundation stage. But there is a lot of talk around children not being potty trained, not having the language, and there has certainly been a COVID impact. And that's why it's so important for us to start changing the story right at the start of life, to give families, carers, and communities all the skills and knowledge they need to grow the next generation. So yes, we have got lots of issues around expectations for children, but we know that the children coming in at the moment were born through COVID or at the end of COVID, where there have been particular challenges across social classes, because I'm sure you will all know, we're all been included in this, where we were trying to work and look after our children at the same time, and that includes young ones. When we're looking at, we always talk about, and a lot of my colleagues that are really steeped in this talk about schools being ready for children, and there's a real mismatch between where education is and where the early years sector is. So we still have children now that will start a phase start to reception, when in reality they've been in 8 or 9 till 6 o'clock in early year settings before they come. So there's a lot of work to do around what that means. So I really feel the question they've asked, because the language sort of started internationally as well, because it was a language that spoke to policymakers, because it can be measured. Yeah, if you tilt the diamond on its head, we know that not all children, it depends on children's life experiences before they go into school to what that achievement will be, and that they can do things. So can I just give an example of a project we've just done using creative art that was a 6-week project, and the big message from staff was, oh my gosh, it was great to be freed from the downward pressure for us in reception and in nurseries to tick a box to get things. So I think there's some work we need to do there about retilting our diamond and looking at that transition into school, because our children in England go younger than other countries in Europe and in Scotland. I'll leave it there. I could go on for ages about that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eunice. There is a second question that I'll just ask each panelist to give a 1-letter response. So the question that's come in is A, B, C, D, or F. What grade would you give the government on their progress so far? So just in your 1-letter response, I'll go to Tamora first.
Oh, that's mean. It's tricky. I'm sorry, I can't reduce it down. Sorry, because we had a manifesto with 5 headlines with 15 bullet points under them. Some of them are just a great big tick. From a campaign's perspective, it's a very big tick. But I think we've heard today that there's other areas where the jury's out still. And it will all come down to implementation. So apologies, can't reduce it to one of those letters. Perhaps others can do better.
Matt, can you better that?
I was going to say I was going to give it a letter. I was going to say B-, I think, and I think because obviously we're not all there, and not everything is, we're not all kind of celebrating saying this work is done and everything's going to be fantastic for the first 1001 days for those of us working in it. But we have something to talk about and work from now. I think that I don't think it is necessary to make the case for why this work is important and why the first 1001 days is important. I think that that's understood, and I think the value of it's understood. I think we can see that across the piece. It's now about how do we kind of translate that, how's that delivered, and there's still lots of questions about that. But I think that we're, at least we're not here saying, well, how do we convince people that they've got to take this seriously?
And Emma, how do you grade the government's progress so far?
In true early years style, I'm not going to give them a grade, but what I am going to say is I definitely think it feels like we're headed in the right direction and we're making good. There's been brilliant progress made, as you can probably tell by the big smile on my face whenever I talk about Best Start in Life strategy. So yeah, good progress. We're on the right track.
Eunice, do you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I would like to give them an A for keeping the language, an A for setting a policy that is 10 years, so it crosses across political boundaries. I would like to say that the sector that plays the thing, as Hamlet says, we've got to get our act together. We've got to speak in one voice so that we get an A as well, because at the moment we're not getting an A in our messages either. So the government has given a framework. Yes, there's lots of issues, but we actually need to be A as well. Otherwise, we will not create a better future for our youngest ones that have just been born today.
And an F for all the panelists for not just answering with the one letter, but hey, who am I to judge? So yeah, just thank you all for coming and joining us today and sacrificing some of your lunch hour. We've heard some compelling evidence and insights, and just as importantly, areas where more work needs to be done. So this gives us a great sense of where the commitments stand today and what we expect to see in the coming months and years ahead. But I think we just have to take a pause and see this as a massive success for us as a movement. We've achieved an awful lot. The Best Start in Life strategy has been published. Family hubs are being expanded. Start for Life has been secured. There have been select committee inquiries into parental leave in the first 1,000 days. The Child Poverty Task Force is underway, and we look forward to hearing back from them with their recommendations in due course. A men's health strategy is being consulted on, and it includes fatherhood as a strand. And the government have launched their review into parental leave. And as I say, I would really encourage you to feed into that if you can over the course of the summer. And above all, we've made sure that babies aren't invisible in the policy process and in public debate. They're very much a part of it. And we thank all of you for your contributions to that. We've achieved all of these victories together, and I thank you for playing your part. Just a tiny bit of housekeeping is that we've launched a First 1001 Days movement page on LinkedIn. It would be great if you could find us and give us a follow. It's probably one of the better ways to keep in touch with our work as we go forward, in particular alongside our newsletter. Like I say, if you're working over the summer, if you could feed into the government's review on parental leave, that would be brilliant. If you aren't working over the summer, I hope you enjoy your holiday and come back rested, refreshed, and refocused on delivering for babies and their families. So take care and have a great summer.